and welcome to this week's HSS Coaches Chat. Today we have here with me Allison Greer, and today we're going to be talking about supporting women and how women train a little differently than men. So, Allison, before we jump into that topic, do you mind introducing yourself, sharing us a little bit about your history, who you are, how you got to HSS?
Sure, great. Thank you for having me. My name is Allison Greer. I'm a physical therapist at HSS. I work on the main campus in our sports clinic. So I'm a sports clinical specialist, and I treat a lot of runners, distance athletes, endurance athletes. And I also am involved in our running mechanics analysis program at HSS, where we analyze patients' running mechanics. We do that each week, and so it's another fun thing that I get to do in addition to treating injured patients. I've been a lifelong runner, ran competitively through college, and then post-collegiately completed marathons. So really have a passion for running, but most importantly, I think those experiences play into my passion for helping promote lifelong running and maintaining health throughout that.
I love that. And running really is a lifelong sport. I mean, at 15 when I joined the cross-country team, never in my wildest dreams did I think I would still be running and then be here coaching runners. And you're here assisting runners, so really great. But this month is a really big month for our women's racing. We have our Mastercard Mini 10K coming up, which is really exciting. So we're going to deep dive a little bit into that later. But I want to focus first on women in particular. Women tend to have a different set of injuries that men can often get. Can you talk a little bit about some injuries that may be more particular to women runners than men?
Absolutely. So when we look at the current body of literature, it says that the overall incidence rates of injuries are similar between males and female runners. But to your point, there are specific injuries that women are more susceptible to than males. And also there are certain body parts that tend to be more injured in females versus males.
Okay.
So for example, the knee joint, we see more knee injuries in female runners than male runners. Some of the most common injuries to the knee that we see in female runners are patellofemoral pain syndrome, which is pain in the front of the knee, kind of around the kneecap. Oftentimes that presents with increased pain with stairs, with prolonged sitting, and of course with running. Another common diagnosis that we see in female knees is IT band pain, and that's more on the outside of the knee. Oftentimes that's most bothersome with running downhills, and again, running in general. So the knee certainly is the most common area that we see in females, more commonly than seen in males. In addition, one of the big kind of groups of injuries that we think about when we work with women runners are bone stress injuries.
Interesting. Okay.
And bone stress injuries, that term refers to kind of a spectrum of bone injuries. So on one end of the spectrum, we have healthy bone. On the other end of the spectrum, we have stress fractures. And so there's a whole spectrum of injuries that can occur to a bone along that spectrum. And this is a really important thing for medical providers who work with female athletes to keep on our radar because it's a really complex and serious medical condition.
Okay.
So when we talk about
what are some of those signs that maybe women are having weaker bones? Like, is there anything that's outwardly present when you're running, and is it a shin splint? Is it like what signs should we be looking for?
Great question. So when we talk about bone stress injuries, first of all, there are a few locations that they commonly occur, especially in females.
Okay.
So the feet, the shin bone, and then the hip and pelvis.
Okay.
So pain in those areas, most predictably, it's painful when we do a certain activity, so walking or certainly running, and it progresses as we go.
Okay.
Sometimes injuries to other tissues, such as muscles or tendons, actually feels a little bit better once our body gets warmed up and into the movement.
Okay.
Bone stress injuries are predictably going to get worse and feel worse the more we do or the more loading we do.
Yeah.
Bone stress injuries can be a representation of a more complex medical problem, what we call the female athlete triad.
Okay. What is the female athlete triad?
And that refers to three interrelated clinical entities. So we talk about low bone density, low energy availability, and then menstrual dysfunction.
Okay.
And so all three of those things for that diagnosis exist simultaneously. And so if we take a bit of a deeper dive into each of those, we talk about bone mineral density, and that's something that most of us don't know without being further evaluated by our medical team, what our bone density is. And so we might be running or walking around without knowing that we have low bone mineral density. The second is low energy availability. And oftentimes we think about the athlete who is intentionally underfueling in an effort to lose weight or maintain a low body weight. But it's not just those athletes that we're thinking about. There are also athletes who are very unintentionally underfueled, just not understanding the principles of nutrition and how to match their activities.
Yep.
So that's the second. And then the third is menstrual dysfunction. And most simply, we look at how frequently a female is menstruating, but that can be disguised if a female is taking oral contraceptive.
Okay.
So again, many of those things we might not know without being further evaluated by a medical provider. And so as medical providers, we know that a bone stress injury doesn't necessarily represent female athlete triad, but it's important for us to consider and evaluate. And it's important because we know that the best treatment for the female athlete triad is prevention and early detection. So at minimum, it can open up the conversation between the medical provider and the runner to educate them on how to maintain healthy status on each of those three components. And at most, it can open up the opportunity for them to work with a multidisciplinary team to evaluate and treat their dysfunctions.
Right, because it's not just overuse. It's not just, not having your period anymore. I mean, during marathon training, you said you run marathons. We sometimes think we're eating enough, and we're just, even when we're resting, we're still burning calories. And so it's how do we fuel for everything? So there's a lot, a multidisciplinary team is actually a really interesting point to bring up because it's not just one cause of this female triad. It's multiple things that they all go haywire. You're going to put your body in risk and your training in risk. But while we're talking about injuries, we do encourage you, if you're here live, to submit questions, have shout outs. And Christina, I think we actually have an injury question that came through.
Yes, we have a question about how to strengthen your pelvic floor while continuing to do your running training.
Great question. And pelvic floor function and dysfunction is really common in all females, but especially in female runners, especially in that postpartum runner or patient. And it's something that really needs to be addressed by a specialist. So within the field of physical therapy, we have specialized therapists. I specialize in sports. We have specialists who specialize in pelvic health.
Oh, okay.
And so that would be somebody that we would want to consult with to get some exercises for.
Okay.
But that could certainly be done with running when appropriate. But there's certainly a distinct set of exercises that you would want to be evaluated by a specialist and a professional in that to identify what exercises are appropriate to support the demands of running. The demands of running, of course, are different than if we're not a runner. So we want to make sure that the exercises that we receive match the demands of running.
Absolutely. And I think that's kind of the biggest point is, maybe doing bicep curls is a great strength training exercise, but it doesn't help with running. So what are some strength training exercises that men, women can do to prevent these injuries that we just talked about?
Yeah, great question. Strengthening is really important for runners. And I think the most important thing that we always want our patients to understand is that strength training is an essential complement to running. Running does not accomplish the strengthening that needs to occur. And what specifically that should look like is 3 to 4 days a week.
Okay.
Probably 20 minutes or so, but of concentrated strengthening things, really focusing on hips, glutes, core, quadricep strength.
So not going to the gym and powerlifting for an hour. It doesn't have to be that intense, right?
Exactly. A lot of these could be body resistance or some resistance that you can find around your house, resistance bands, things like that. It doesn't need to be powerlifting in the gym. And honestly, sometimes the powerlifting that we do might not complement or meet the demands of running as well as some of the other exercises that could be provided.
And I was going to say I love resistance bands. Those are my favorite things to do, especially in the winter when it's snowing and icing out. And you can get some good mornings going, some hamstring curls, and you do a few of those, they start to burn. They're really good strength training exercises. So
exactly, and they travel well. And if you don't have a gym membership, you can use those and maybe modify your exercises a little bit. So go a little bit slower through the range of motion if the resistance is less, if you don't have weights available. But there are certainly ways that you can use those to get a good workout as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also, while we're talking about different moves, I want to highlight tonight, if anyone is free, we're going to have a session also presented by HSS about the benefits of cross-training for female runners. So if you're free tonight, they're going to be at the Run Center from 6 to 7 p.m. While registration is required, We'll drop the link for Eventbrite in the chat either now or later on. So that way, if you're free, you can meet one of Allison's colleagues and certainly learn some new strength training moves. But what else? What are some other exercises? If they don't have bands, can they do weights with just their body? Like, what are some good movements that runners can do if they have no weights or resistance bands?
Yeah, I think kind of thinking about the strengthening exercises in two groups. One group being exercises that focus on one specific area.
Okay.
So, for example, lying on your side and doing a leg lift. That focuses on the outside of your hip, which is a really important muscle for all runners, but especially females, to have good strength in. Or a bridging exercise where you're laying on your back and lifting your hips up and down. Those focus on one specific muscle group and are really important. Planking, side planks, forward planks. Those are another great option to help get hip muscles and core muscles. So those are kind of isolated exercises, which are really effective. Additionally, runners need some exercises that look like the demands of running.
Right.
So lunges, single leg squats, things that they're upright and they're in a runner's type position. So they're in single leg stance, which is what running is, or they're in kind of that staggered stance, which is what lunges are. And again, you could mix in some holds, you can mix in some kind of slowing down the motion to make it more difficult in the absence of heavy weights.
Really good. And while you mentioned lunges, would lunges maybe help strengthen someone's stride and kind of build that leg muscle up?
Exactly.
Awesome. Yeah. And the reason I wanted to ask that is because we also have another event coming up with HSS that will do just that, strengthen their stride. Your colleague, Polly DeMille, is coming here next Tuesday, June 6th, from 6 to 7 p.m. to go over more tips and exercises to prepare you for our upcoming Mastercard Mini 10K. So want to definitely translate what you're saying here to real life and in person. Again, if anyone is not registered for that event, we'll drop the Eventbrite link in there. But strengthening your stride is so important, especially in Central Park. Have you run in Central Park before?
Yes.
So you've seen the hills.
Yes.
So super important to strengthen up that stride. But another thing I wanted to ask you about is, while women run, how can people who are not runners support women running? What does that look like? What do you think?
That's an exciting and fun question. You know, the world of distance running, both in America and worldwide, I mean, our female runners are running faster times than we've ever seen before. So it's a really fun time to follow them and support them in any way we can. So whether that is supporting them on social media, listening to their podcasts, there are lots of books now written by professional female runners, understanding who their sponsors are, and making a commitment to support them financially by purchasing apparel or shoes or nutrition that you would use to support the brands that support them. I think those are some really good ways in terms of kind of using our elite runners. In terms of if we are a runner, some ways that we can help support the sport, and specifically women's runners, are seeking out women's running coaches, women trainers, women physical therapists, etc., to kind of support women. And then I think also, all of us can help other females in our lives discover the sport of running.
Absolutely.
So whether we think about children or adolescents and introducing them to the sport of running for the first time, or whether we think about our adult friends or family members, colleagues, neighbors, everybody needs a little bit of encouragement and exposure, but the sport of running and the environment of the running community is so infectious in the joy that it brings. So I think just helping people discover that is a great step and really will help build women's running as well.
Yeah, and that's a really great point. You talk about exposure. You know, if I didn't have that exposure to cross country in high school, I would have thought that running was just punishment for when I played other sports, basketball, volleyball. But you get that opportunity to experience it, to be part of a team, whether it's, you know, in high school or in the park, you joining one of our many running clubs in the city and in the tri-state area. And you realize you're not alone, and you go out on these runs, and you know nothing is better than when you see someone on a Sunday morning, Saturday morning, you're out for your long run, and everyone's coming in like fist pumping and high fiving, and you know whether you're young, old, like everyone's out there, and it's such good camaraderie. Especially seeing women. You know, we just had the Shape Women's Half Marathon in April, and now we're having the Mastercard Women's 10K. It's just exciting to see all the women out there supporting each other. There's nothing more beautiful than that.
Exactly. It's such a supportive, encouraging group. And even if somebody isn't interested in running, just exposing them to the excitement of the environment of a road race, I think that's infectious alone.
Absolutely.
So that would be a place to start, too.
Love that. Absolutely love that. And then I think we're going to throw it back out to some questions and shout outs maybe before we move on to the Mastercard Mini 10K. Christina, what else do we have out there that we're getting?
All right, we have a question. Is yoga beneficial to runners?
That's a great question. I think that yoga can also serve as a great complement to running, understanding what it does and doesn't help you with.
Okay.
So it'll help with some flexibility and mobility for sure.
Okay.
Most female runners don't need as much of that. What they need is more strength-based.
Okay.
And yoga can certainly help with some strength-based things as well. I wouldn't see it as a replacement for some of the strength training.
Okay.
But I do think that it could be a good complement to that.
And could strength training also could that also be balancing some I know I've tried to do a few yoga moves where you're balancing on one foot and my ankles are getting really hot. Like that could be a little bit of strength training, right?
Absolutely. That's a great example. As runners, by definition, we are only on one leg at a time.
Right.
There's never a point when we are on both legs at the same time. So we have to have such great stability in single leg stance.
Yeah.
So just balancing on one leg is a great place to start, but then absolutely want to add other challenges, whether it's closing our eyes, standing on a more unstable surface, adding some body movements. We have to be really stable and strong in that single leg stance position.
Okay. So maybe not a replacement for strength training, but a nice complement as part of running strength training, as part of the overall training program.
Exactly. A good, well-rounded training program.
Awesome. What else do we have?
All right, we have another question. How do I get back into running after ACL surgery? I'm nervous about having knee pain.
Great question as well. So in terms of our postoperative recovery patients, a lot of them, their goal is to get back to running.
Of course.
And we have some really good kind of clear objective measurements that we want those patients to hit and achieve before we know that they're ready to run. So for example, for knee patients, this ACL patient specifically, there are some specific strength metrics that we would want that runner to achieve to tell us that their body is equipped to handle the demands of running.
Right.
So we would assess their strength. We would look at kind of how they move in single leg stance with their single leg squats.
Okay.
So there would be certain things that we would want to evaluate, knowing that those things, when accomplished, set you up well for the demands of running.
Right, because when you're running, it's not just your body weight. There's added pressure every time we step, right? So it's not just if you weigh 100 pounds coming on the ground, right? There's a lot more pressure happening. So.
Exactly. It's more than just a single leg squat. It's almost like a single leg jump and land. So the body weight is exponential that's coming down on you, and we call those kind of navigating the ground reaction forces. So when your body hits the ground, there are forces coming back on you. The stronger we are, the better we're served to navigate those forces.
So it may take a little while because we want to have our knee even stronger than before, really.
Exactly.
Very cool.
All right, we have two more questions. The first one is, can I run through posterior tibialis, my apologies if I pronounced that wrong, tendonitis if the symptoms are mild, around a 3 out of 10 pain scale?
Most injuries, we certainly don't encourage patients to run through pain.
Right.
For example, the bone source injuries that we talked about a few minutes ago, we absolutely shouldn't be running or even walking through that type of pain. That could make that injury significantly worse. The one arguably exception to that would be tendon injuries, or what we call tendinopathy. Okay. So in this case, that's what we're describing. We're describing a tendon problem in the foot.
Okay.
Typically in the clinic, our recommendations for patients are if the pain doesn't increase more than 2 points, so you said your pain was a 3 out of 10, and you can run normally without your mechanics changing, then it's probably okay to continue in the setting of a tendinopathy. Most other injuries, that's not the case. Of course, we don't want your mechanics to change. Otherwise, we worry that you're going to end up with another injury somewhere outside of the foot. But if those two things are satisfied, then it's probably reasonable to run to some level while you're recovering and doing all the strengthening and other things that you need to do to help your foot recover.
And I just want to talk about what you just said, where if your body mechanics change. How would I know if I'm not running in front of a treadmill if my body mechanics are changing? Should I be looking for pain diagonal in the exact same spot in my other foot? How would I recognize if my body mechanics have changed?
Good question. I think if you're so painful that you feel like you can't trust or fully use that side, that would be one thing for sure. If you feel like you're overloading, or maybe your other side that doesn't have the pain is getting fatigued more quickly than your side with injury, that also would suggest that you're probably overloading that side. And then too, you could ask somebody to just kind of watch you run, and do you look relatively symmetric, or does it look like you're kind of favoring one side versus the other?
And I have to ask, because I know a lot of our runners think they have high pain tolerance and that they can run through injuries. So what are the motions that we should be looking for? So that's really helpful to know that if your one side is feeling more fatigued than normal, then that's a sign that it's not like you had a hard workout. It's that maybe you're overcompensating and your one leg is trying to do 2 times the work.
Right.
So that's a really good point to bring up. Thank you. Christina, what was that last question that we had?
Our last question is, I used to get posterior shin splints, then I realized I land on my heel. Now I make more of an effort to land mid-foot, but now my bunions hurt a lot. What do I do?
So there are really 3 different ways that we can land when we're running. We could be a heel striker, and that's what most distance runners are. We could be a midfoot striker, which means that we're kind of landing flat, or we could be a forefoot striker. It sounds like this patient has kind of adjusted from one position to another, and understanding that there's not one perfect way to run, but with each of those landing patterns comes different consequences or different loads placed on different tissues. So there isn't a perfect way to run. Some people will do better with one type than the other. So for example, if you have a history of bunion, which is a toe injury, we probably don't want to reinforce landing in that forefoot position. But for somebody else, that might be a better position to land in to offload some other structures. So it's really an individualized question that I think could be better answered with a running mechanics analysis. The other thing that one could do just to evaluate themselves is to monitor your cadence, which is your number of steps per minute. And normally we're looking for about 170 to 180 steps per minute. So first of all, identifying if you're in that range, and if you're not, certainly probably some biomechanical changes are warranted.
So let's deep dive a little bit into the running mechanics analysis. What does that look like? Are you just watching me run up and down the block? How would that benefit me?
So in our clinic, we do a 90-minute session. Which is our running mechanics analysis, and it's really 4 different components. So the first component is the therapist and the runner getting to know each other a little bit better. The therapist learning about the runner's goals, their injury history, what they're doing right now for training, etc. So kind of that conversation. The second piece is our physical exam. So the runner is on the table, the physical therapist is assessing their strength, their flexibility, those types of things. The third component is a functional movement screen. So we're looking at how they move. How do they walk? What does it look like when they squat, when they do a single leg squat? Things that mimic some of the demands of running. And then the fourth and final part is the running analysis. And we do that on a treadmill, and we record from all 4 sides, so from the back, from the front, and from each side. And the way we describe it is those are kind of our 4 puzzle pieces. Though what's happening on the treadmill tells us what's happening, but the 3 other puzzle pieces tell us why it's happening. And so our job as physical therapists is to put all 4 of those puzzle pieces together to come up with a treatment plan for the runner. And it's really fun. You get to spend 90 minutes together really getting to know the runner well and putting together a really comprehensive plan for them moving forward.
I love that idea, because there are so many nuanced things that you don't know when you're running. I mean, I don't run in front of a mirror, and to be able to have someone look at you, study you, that's going to point out so many little things, or maybe even big things, that could really help your running form and take your training and your results to the next level by having an expert evaluate everything you're doing.
Yeah, I think it's a great service for our runners. And I don't think that runners should feel the responsibility of evaluating that on their own. When you're running, you should be able to enjoy exactly. Leave that to the professionals to evaluate and to give you the tools to put that in place. People always say after they complete the running analysis, the question is always, what do I do next? Which is a great question, and we appreciate their enthusiasm. Our goal is to give them some exercises. Think about how they can use the muscles and the positions to mimic the demands of running, but then let those things kind of fold into their running. So don't overthink their running. Do the work that we've prescribed, and let those things kind of translate into
It'll all
running.
come together.
Exactly.
That's amazing. So let's talk about the runner who's now done the training, has gotten the mechanics analysis. They're ready. They're running the Mastercard Mini 10K in 2 weeks. How should they be preparing with respect to fueling, hydration, It's going to be summer. It's getting warmer. What are some key preparation steps that they should be thinking of?
Well, I think in leading up to any big race, you want to treat kind of the preceding weeks as almost like your dress rehearsal for the actual race day. So in terms of fueling, in terms of nutrition, you want to know by race day what things your body responds well to. What types of things, how much, what the timing of that is. It's difficult. We're kind of transitioning seasons here in New York right now, going from some relatively cooler weather to some relatively warmer weather. Which runners might not be fully acclimated to on race day. So making sure that you're staying really well hydrated to kind of counter some of that. And maybe depending on the weather for race day, but if it is hotter and more humid than what you've been training in, start out probably a little bit more conservatively, knowing that your body's going to take a little bit more of a hit just in those different environmental conditions.
Absolutely. And that's, I think, the thing a lot of runners, and I can only speak for myself really, when we switch seasons, and we've been running in this beautiful, cool weather, and then all of a sudden, like I think Friday, it's going to be really warm. And so you go out running, you've got a great run Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. You go out Friday, you're like, why can't I run? I ran yesterday, I felt great, and it's the weather.
It feels very different, especially those first few runs in a change of climate.
Absolutely. So we've done our dress rehearsal. We've found out what we're going to have on race day, our fuel, our hydration, we're feeling good. First thing that our runners want to think about is now what kind of clothes to wear. So if it's going to be hot, we're not, for the most part, wearing long sleeves. We're going to be wearing sweat-wicking clothing. It's going to be light material. We want our skin to breathe because sweating is how we cool off, right?
Exactly. And, another thing to think about, too, is depending on the size of the race, you might be in the starting corral for quite a while. And if it starts early in the day, it might be cool while you're standing in the corral. So maybe wearing a long sleeve shirt just to keep you warm while you're there, but then being ready to toss that.
Be ready to go. Yeah. And that's a really good point. So for runners running the Mastercard Mini 10K, you're going to want to make sure that you plan ahead because, one, you're going to be dropping your bag off in Central Park, and then the start line is actually 40 blocks north. So once you drop your bag off, either jog up to the start, maybe use that as a warm-up, potentially.
Absolutely.
And then if you're warmed up, you're ready to go. Now you're waiting in the corral. What's something that some runners can do while they're waiting for the gun to go off? Our corrals close a few minutes before the race starts. Should they just stand there? Should they be doing some stretching? What are some things you could recommend?
Usually pre-activity, we promote dynamic stretching, which is stretching with movement. So rather than sitting on the ground and kind of doing a stationary 30-second hold, it's movement while you're moving, or stretching while you're moving. So for example, some walking quad stretches or hamstring stretches, things like that. Now in a corral, you might not have that much space.
Right.
But at least, even if it's just some standing, kind of bending forward and back, incorporating more dynamic movements rather than static holds would be recommended.
Right, because just sitting down in a figure 4 position, that's not really doing what we want.
It's not preparing your body for what's about to come when you take off from the start line.
And when we take off, we're going to be heading south on Central Park West and then entering the park at Strawberry Hill. And we're going to be going downhill. So what happens to the body when we take off? We've got adrenaline going. Should we be taking off or should we maybe be holding back a little with respect to the weather? And
running downhill is actually one of the most challenging things for our body.
Really?
Because it's essentially putting on the brakes every step that we take. And so, I think just from a race perspective, keep in mind that you want to kind of put the brakes on a little bit just to conserve energy. But from a musculoskeletal standpoint, understand that there's actually a high demand on your body in running downhill and kind of controlling that motion. And that's where the strength part comes in. The stronger we are, the better equipped we are to handle the demands and the forces of running down a hill.
So even though we're going to want to go fast, we're going to have a nice downhill, like I said, coming off Strawberry Hill and then going around the South Loop, we should think about how much pressure is really going on our body and that it's not just we're running downhill, it's going to be easy. There's a lot from a musculoskeletal standpoint that's happening. So really important to think about that. And along the course, when we come around the South Loop, we're going to go past the mall and then eventually up and over Cat Hill. So for those that have run in Central Park, Cat Hill's a pretty tough hill. What happens to the body when we're going uphill? I mean, that's strength training too, right?
Absolutely. A different type than going downhill. But absolutely, your heart rate is probably going to be elevated, and it's a challenge. So, from a movement standpoint, we're thinking about short, quick steps, driving our knees up, driving our feet up to kind of quick step over step using our arms to help propel us forward.
Okay.
And again, just keeping in mind, I think knowing the course and knowing that it is a hilly course, and keeping in mind that you need to conserve some energy for both the ups and the downhills.
Got it. So to circle back from earlier, lunges from strength training, planks for core work, staying upright when we're going uphill. And by doing planks on our forearms, we're building that arm muscle to start going up. So everything that we've been doing in preparation will come to fruition right on Cat Hill. You're going to use everything you've done, and it's going to happen there. After you go over Cat Hill, you're going to go up and behind the Metropolitan Museum of Art, around East Drive, and then up and over to the 100-second transverse, making a left onto what we call West Drive and running the Three Sisters. So along Central Park West, I'm sure you've run through Central Park, there's these 3 pleasant hills that roll all the way down to the 70-second transverse. So you'll be running on 2 of those. And then on the 70-second transverse, our runners are going to be running left and into the finish line. When a runner finishes a race, should they just find the closest seat and sit down? What are some of the important things that runners, once they finish, should think about?
The most important thing is to keep moving.
Okay.
First of all, your heart rate is going through some changes, when you're exerting yourself versus when you stop. And we want to kind of modulate that as best as we can so there's no sudden drops. But also from your muscles, they're probably going to try to tighten up. So keeping moving is the best thing to kind of counter that. Putting your hands on top of your head so you're trying not to lean forward, and just kind of keep moving through the finishing corral, making sure that you get hydration and some fuel right away as well.
Okay, really important, because I know a lot of times, especially the 10K races, they're an intense pace. They're a very hard pace to run, and that is something that you want to stop because you're tired. You're gasping for air, your heart is pumping, but to keep moving into then level off, you would say, your heart rate to kind of bring it down nice and gradually as opposed to just dropping it like that.
Exactly.
So really important. But I don't want to go too deep into the Mastercard Mini 10K in our little chat. What other questions maybe have about the course, the injuries, anything like that? Some shout outs?
We don't have a question, but we have a shout out from Dennis Batista. He said, "Thank you for all the tips. It's always great to learn from the professionals."
Thank you for listening, Dennis. We appreciate it. So if we don't have any more questions or shout outs, I do want to just highlight one more time our HSS event tonight here at the Run Center. So if you're local, if you're in the New York City area, tonight we're going to be having benefits of cross training for female runners at the Run Center. The Eventbrite link will either be in the chat or we'll be posting it in the chat, as well as next Tuesday, June 6th, we're going to have another HSS expert come here and talk about how to strengthen your stride. So for when you're running up those hills, how to strengthen that stride, how to get up the hill and over it. But Allison, I really appreciate you being here, talking us through the female triad, the bone mineral density issues that women may not even know that they have, and then talking about race strategy and fueling for our upcoming Mastercard Mini 10K. It was really great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. All right, we'll see you guys next time. Have a great day.